The scar ran from her left temple to the corner of her jaw, and the town of Harwick had made up its mind about it before Margaret Inez had finished making up her mind about what came next. She had gotten the scar in the fire that took the barn, which was the same fire that took her husband, which was the October 2 years ago that had taken most of what Margaret had built her life on and left her with the house, 12 acres, a milk cow, and the particular quality of silence that follows a catastrophe when the catastrophe is over and the living still have to live. The scar was not the worst of what the fire had given her. She knew this. She had spent a year knowing it, in the careful and methodical way she approached most things that needed to be known. The worst was Edmund, who had gone into the barn for the horses and not come back out. The scar was what happened to her face when she went in after him. She had gotten 2 of the horses out. She had not gotten Edmund out. She had come out of the barn with her left side burned and her husband dead inside, and she had stood in the yard in the dark and watched the barn finish going. And that was the night she had understood something about the distance between what you could do and what you could not do, which was a distance she would spend the next 2 years learning to carry. Harwick had its own understanding of that night, which was different from hers and had calcified, the way a town's understanding of a thing calcifies, into a story that was simpler than what had happened and more comfortable for the people who had not been there. The story was poor Margaret Innes, who had lost her husband and her barn and her good looks in the same fire, was a woman the disaster had used up. She had tried, and the fire had beaten her, and she bore the evidence on her face, and the town was sorry for her, in the specific performative way of a town that is more sorry for its own discomfort than for hers. She had been turned away from 3 positions in 2 years. Not crudely, Harwick was not a cruel town, only a thoughtless one. She had been told the position was filled, which it was not. She had been told they needed someone with more recent experience, which she had. She had been told this was the one that had stayed with her, said by the wife of the man who ran the feed store, with a look she had clearly thought was kind, that she might find something less demanding while she got back on her feet. She was on her feet. She had been on her feet since October. She was so consistently on her feet that the soles of her boots had worn thin from the being on them. Those 2 years had not been idle. She had managed her 12 acres with the methodical competence of a woman who understood that competence was now the whole of what she had and therefore could not be allowed to slip. She kept her accounts clean and her fences sound and her small herd of 6 cattle healthy and properly rotated. And she put up enough in the root cellar each fall that the winter had never once made her afraid. She had skills that were worth paying for, and she had tried 3 times to be paid for them and had been turned away each time. And she had understood by the 3rd time that the town of Harwick was not going to let her be what she was because the town of Harwick had looked at her face and decided what she was, and those were not the same thing. She had not let herself be angry about this for very long. Anger, in her experience, was useful in short doses and corrosive in long ones, and she had enough to manage without adding corrosion. She had been practical instead, which was harder than being angry and more productive. She had heard about the Carver operation from a woman at the church who mentioned it without thinking. The way people mentioned things not meant for Margaret. A foreman's position. An operation that needed managing. The Carver Ranch 3 miles out of town that had been running thin since old Cal Carver lost his foreman in August. The woman had been talking to someone else, and Margaret had been near enough to hear and had filed it away without expression and gone home and thought about it for the rest of the day. The next morning, she hitched her milk cow's partner, a gray pony she kept for light driving, to the small trap she had not sold because she still needed a way to get places, and she drove to the Carver Ranch. She had not expected to be hired. She had expected to be heard, and she had intended to make the hearing count. The rancher's name was Seth Carver. And he was 35 years old, and the thing that struck Margaret first about him was that he looked at her face without looking away and without making a point of not looking away, which was the rarest of the three options and the only one that was not an imposition. He was at the fence line nearest the road when she drove up, mending a wire gap with the unhurried competence of a man who understood that fence work done fast was fence work done twice. He looked at her when she stopped the trap, and he looked at the trap itself and at the gray pony, and then back at her. "Mrs. Innes," he said. She was surprised he knew her name. She did not show it. "Mr. Carver," she said. "I heard you were short a foreman." He wound the wire end and set the pliers on the post. "I am," he said. "I'd like to apply for the position," she said. He looked at her for a moment, not the face, not the scar, but her, the whole of her standing at his fence in October. She would remember the quality of that look later, not because it was warm, which it was not particularly, but because it was honest, which was something else entirely. "Get down," he said. "I'll show you the place." She got down. He showed her the operation with the same efficiency with which he had mended the fence, methodically, completely, without deciding in advance what she needed to see and what she did not. The cattle count, the winter pasture situation, the condition of the corrals and the hay stores, the account books which he brought out from the house without being asked, because she had asked about the financial situation and he had understood that meant the books. She went through the books at the kitchen table while he poured coffee, and she took the time they required, which was 20 minutes, and she asked the questions the books raised, and he answered them accurately and without guarding the information. When she was done, she set the books on the table and looked at him. "Your operating costs are too high on the feed line," she said. "Your foreman was buying from Guthrie's, and you can get the same quality from the Mennonite operation at Cress Creek for 14% less. I know because I bought from them for 6 years." He looked at her. "Your south pasture rotation is off by 2 weeks," she said. "If you push it back, you'll get another cutting before the frost. You won't get a full cutting, but you'll get enough to matter." She set her hands on the table. "I managed my husband's operation for 6 years, and my own for 2 years after that. I know cattle, and I know accounts, and I know how to manage men who are inclined to test a woman in the position. I've had practice with that last part." She held his eyes. "I'm not going to tell you the scar doesn't matter. I know the world you're operating in. I know what people will say. But if you hire me on what I can do, I will do it, and at the end of the first month, you can decide whether what I do is worth more than what people say." He was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the account books, and then at the window, and then at her. He was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the account books, and then at the window, and then at her face, and for the first time since she had driven up to his fence, he looked at it directly. Not averting, and not making a performance of the not averting, but looking at her the way she had looked at the books, fully, and without arriving at a conclusion before he had seen the whole. Then he went to the hook beside the back door, and he took down a ring of keys. The operation keys, the barn lock, the equipment shed, the storeroom, the outer gate. He carried them across the kitchen, and he set them on the table in front of her without comment and without ceremony, the way he had done the fence work, efficiently, and because it needed doing. "The barn lock sticks if you don't lift the ring before you turn," he said. "Everything else works clean." She looked at the keys on the table. She looked at the man who had put them there. She picked them up. They were heavier than they looked, which was always the way with the things that mattered. She closed her hand around them and felt the weight and understood it, and she thought, this is what a fair assessment looks like. She had not had one in 2 years, and she had nearly forgotten what it felt like. Harwick heard about it within the week, which was faster than Margaret had expected, and about as fast as was possible in a town of that size. She heard about what Harwick heard from Mrs. Ellery at the dry goods, who was the kind of woman who told you what was being said about you because she believed in honesty and had not yet understood the difference between honesty and cruelty. Mrs. Ellery said that people were saying Seth Carver had made a mistake and that it was a pity, and Mrs. Ellery's expression said she was among the people who were saying it. Margaret bought her flour and her salt and her thread, and she said nothing, and she drove back to the Carver ranch, and she went to work. Harwick heard about it within the week. She heard about what Harwick heard from Mrs. Ellery at the dry goods, who told her because she believed in honesty and had not yet understood the difference between honesty and cruelty. Mrs. Ellery said that people were saying Seth Carver had made a mistake and it was a pity, and the expression on Mrs. Ellery's face said she was among those saying it. Margaret bought her flour and salt and thread and said nothing and drove back to the Carver ranch and went to work. She had told Seth Carver she could manage men who tested a woman in the position, and the Carver crew gave her the opportunity to prove it within the first 3 days. There were 4 hands on the winter crew, and 3 of them she had assessed by the end of the first morning, a solid man named Heck, who would do what needed doing as long as someone told him what needed doing. A young hand called Bird, who was eager and not yet experienced but had good instincts, and an older hand named Ruiz, who had his own opinions about how the place should be run and was waiting to see if she was worth adjusting them. 4. The 4th hand was the one who required management. His name was Denton, and he had been with the Carver operation for 3 years and had expected, Margaret gathered, to move into the foreman's position himself. He was not incompetent, and he was not stupid, but he was the kind of man who required a clear accounting of why a woman was telling him what to do, and he intended to extract that accounting by not doing what she told him and then demonstrating that the result was suboptimal and then waiting to see what she did about it. She had seen this approach before. She had 3 days' patience for it. On the 3rd day, he did not fix the fence section she had twice asked him to fix. She said nothing to Denton. She fixed the fence herself in front of the whole crew efficiently and correctly, and when she was done, she came back to where Denton was standing and she said, "I fixed it this time. If it needs fixing again, you'll fix it. If you decide you can't manage that, I'll pay you what you're owed through Thursday, and we'll call it settled." Denton looked at the fence. He looked at her. He fixed the fence when it needed fixing. Ruiz had his opinion adjusted by the end of the 2nd week. She caught the problem with the water trough feed line on the north pasture before it became a crisis, a slow leak into the ground that had been going for at least a week, which she identified by noticing that the cattle on that pasture were rotating off feed slightly earlier than their usual pattern. They were not sick. They were thirsty. The trough looked full because the feed line kept it topped, but the leak meant the fresh water was draining before the cattle could benefit from it fully. She fixed the line herself because it was there and needed fixing, and she was the one standing next to it, and Ruiz watched the whole repair without commentary. That evening he came to the barn while she was finishing up, and he stood for a moment and then said the old foreman had never caught it that way. She had set down her tool. He had said, by watching the animals instead of the equipment. She had said, that's the only way that works. The equipment shows you what it looks like. The animals show you what's true. Ruiz had nodded. He was a man who respected a correct answer, arrived at by correct reasoning, and she had given him one, and after that he worked for her the same way he had clearly once worked for a foreman he respected, which was completely and without requiring a reason for each instruction beyond the obvious one that she was the foreman and the instruction was reasonable. Heck was her most useful man by the end of the 1st month, and Bird was learning faster than she had expected, and Denton had discovered that the position he occupied was more comfortable when the woman in charge of it knew what she was doing. And Margaret had the Carver operation running at a standard that satisfied her. which was a higher standard than it had been running at before because she was constitutionally incapable of stopping at adequate when better was available. Seth Carver said nothing to her about any of this. He was a man who had hired her to do a job and was watching her do it, and adding his opinion to the process would have been an intrusion she had not asked for and did not need. He was at the ranch most days, working the south section or managing the cattle himself, visible from the corrals or the fence line or the barn, a steady presence that asked nothing of her except the work and did not fuss over the work. He had seen the Denton situation. She knew this because on the day she fixed the fence herself, she had looked up midway through the job and Seth had been at the near corner of the barn, not watching obviously, but present and aware. He had not intervened. He had not come over afterward. He had simply seen it and understood it and let it be what it was, which was hers to handle and handled. She was aware of his awareness, the way a woman is aware of being seen clearly by someone who is not making a production of the seeing. It was different from being looked at, which she had learned to manage years ago. It was being known in a particular way by a particular person, and it was the kind of thing she had told herself she was not going to think about. She was not thinking about it. She was doing the work. The work was what she was there for, and it was sufficient, and she was not going to let herself complicate something that was working by wondering if it was also something else. The thing that changed was not a single event, but a series of small ones, which was how most real things changed, and how Margaret had learned to pay attention, not to the large moments which announced themselves, but to the accumulation of the small ones, which told you more. In November she found a discrepancy in the accounts, a pattern of overcharge from a feed supplier. Consistent across 14 months, small enough per invoice to miss if you were not looking at the whole, but unmistakable when you laid the invoices against the market price she had begun tracking in October because she always tracked supplier prices. The previous foreman had either not caught it or not reported it, and the total amounted to something that was not a small number. She brought the books to Seth without preface, the relevant pages marked with strips of paper, the pattern annotated in the margin in her careful hand. He read through it without speaking. He looked at it for a long time. "How much?" he said. She told him. He sat back. He looked at the books and then at her. "How long did it take you to find this?" 4 days, she said. "I was looking for something else when I saw the pattern." He was quiet for a moment. "Then, write the letter to the supplier. I'll sign it." She wrote the letter that evening at the foreman's desk she had been using since October. Precise and fully documented, and without heat, the kind of letter a man who received it would understand left him no comfortable options. She brought it to Seth the next morning. He read it through, turned a page, read it again, and signed it without changing a word. He handed it back and looked at her. "You write a good letter," he said. "I write an accurate one," she said. "There's a difference." The corner of his mouth moved. Just the corner. Just once. She handed him the letter and went back to the accounts. She posted the letter in town and did not think about the corner of his mouth and was mostly successful. December came in with serious cold. On the morning it dropped hardest overnight, she arrived at the east section trough before first light to find Seth already there, breaking the ice crust with the back of a hatchet in the methodical way he did physical work, which was without waste. They broke the rest of it together without discussion, working from opposite ends of the trough, and when they were done the cattle moved in, and the air had the particular quality of an early winter morning when the work is being done and the day has not yet complicated itself. "The east trough needs a cover before the next freeze," she said. The ice was nearly 2 inches. "I've been meaning to build one for 2 years," he said. "I'll build it," she said. "I'll need the right wood and the hardware." He looked at her with the expression that was not surprise and not doubt, but was something in between the two that she was learning to read as his version of paying attention. "I know how to build a trough cover," she said. "I know you do," he said, and she believed him, which was itself worth noting. She built it that week, a solid board cover with a rope hinge and a weighted edge that would stay closed in wind. And it worked. And the east trough did not freeze solid again that winter. She did not make anything more of the fact that Seth had brought the lumber to the site on a morning she had not yet told him which site she meant. She noticed it. She filed it alongside several other things she had noticed and was not yet ready to name. It was January, on an evening when the work was done and the cold was settled in for the night, and there was no good reason to go back to her 12 acres and every practical reason to accept the cup of coffee he had poured without asking if she wanted it, that she understood something she had been not understanding for 3 months. She was sitting across the kitchen table from Seth Carver, with the account books open between them and the lamp between the books and the window full of January dark, and she looked at him in the lamplight and understood that what she felt about this man had been quietly building since October without her permission and with considerable patience, as if it knew she would not be available to it until she had done the work first. She looked at the account books. She looked at the lamp. She thought about the scar and what the town had said and the 3 positions she had been turned away from and Mrs. Ellery's particular variety of honesty and the keys on the kitchen table in October, set down without ceremony, and she thought, "He did not hand me the keys because he pitied me. He handed me the keys because he saw what I was going to do with them." The understanding of what she felt was not frightening. It was clarifying. It was the specific clarity of a thing that has been true for a while and has simply been waiting for you to have the space to see it. She did not say anything about it that evening. She was not ready to, and she was a woman who did not act on a thing before she was ready. Seth looked up from the accounts. "The feed line estimate for February," he said. "Did you use the Crest Creek price?" "Yes," she said. "It's the right price." He looked at the figure. He looked at her. "It is," he said. She closed the account book. She picked up her coffee and she held it and looked at the window and the dark and the January cold pressing at the glass. And she thought about 12 acres and a house and a milk cow and the boots she had worn through in 2 years of being on her feet. And she thought about a ring of keys set on a kitchen table, without ceremony, by a man who did not make a project of what he saw or what he chose not to see. And she thought, "I have been managing alone for 2 years and I am very good at it, and it is not what I want." She had not known what she wanted until she was sitting across the table from it. "Seth," she said. He looked at her. She held his eyes in the lamplight, with the account books between them and the January dark at the window and the fire burning steady in the stove. "I'm going to say something," she said, "and I'd like you to let me say the whole of it before you answer." He set down his pen. She said the whole of it. She said it the way she did most things, plainly, completely, without dressing it up or softening it into something easier to receive. She had been managing alone for 2 years, and she had gotten very good at saying what was true, and she applied this skill now, holding his eyes all the way through, because looking away would have been the easier choice, and she had not been doing the easier thing for 2 years, and did not intend to start tonight. When she was done, the kitchen was very quiet. The stove ticked. The lamp between them held steady. Seth looked at her for a long time with the expression she had come to know, which was not blank, but interior. A man giving something the full weight of his attention, which was the same attention he gave a fence gap or an account discrepancy or a trough that needed covering. Meaning it was the most serious attention she had ever seen directed at anything. "I handed you those keys in October," he said, "because I had heard about the Innies operation and what you built there, and because I looked at you at my fence and I saw a woman who had come to do a job and was not going to let herself be turned away from it. He paused. That was true. It's still true. She waited. She had learned in 3 months that Seth finished what he started. It was also not the whole of what was true, he said. She looked at him. I have been sitting across this table from you for 3 months, he said, and I have been thinking about the account books for perhaps a third of that time. The other 2/3 I have been thinking about other things and not saying so, because it was not my place to say so while you were doing the job and I was the man who hired you for it. He held her eyes. You took the question out of my hands tonight. I'm grateful for that. She thought about the keys on the table in October, set down without ceremony or explanation, and the barn lock that stuck if you didn't lift the ring first, and 3 months of being seen clearly by a man who never made a show of the seeing. She thought about Harwick and Mrs. Ellery and the feed store wife and the 3 positions and the word finished, which was a word people used when they had decided what a person was worth and needed a clean way to say it. She had been called finished. She had not been finished. She had been here. Then we understand each other, she said. We do, he said. The simplicity of it was exactly right. She had said a full thing, and he had heard it fully and given a full answer, and that was what 2 honest people did. She opened the account book again. The March feed estimate, she said. I'm going to use the Cress Creek price. The quality held all winter, and the arrangement is reliable. Use it, he said. He pulled the adjacent column toward him and began the review. She wrote the figure. The lamp held steady between them in the kitchen of his ranch, which was now also hers in the particular way a place becomes a person's when they have spent 3 months learning it and caring for it and making it run better than it did before. Not because they were paid to, but because they were constitutionally incapable of stopping at adequate when better was available. Outside, the January dark held the Kansas land. Inside, the stove was warm. Somewhere in Harwick, someone was probably still saying it was a pity. They were wrong. And they had been wrong. And the account books proved it every month, and the trough cover held through the rest of the winter without fail. And the cattle on the north pasture were healthy and well-watered because a woman had learned to watch the animals instead of the trough. And she was not finished, she had. In fact, barely started.